Hello. So today I want to talk about core wounds, and what I've found trying to talk about them is that they are really, really, really messy. So the first thing that I want to clarify about core wounds, they are the belly, right? They are the centermost part of the wound or the pain. That is the definition of core wound, is that is the most essential part of the central part of the injury or the hurt. Um, and even often we don't recognize that the things that happen to us every day have anything to do with this wound. Maybe we don't think about that wound. We may compartmentalize it somewhere and go, yeah, we don't think about that, so it doesn't hurt me. And chances are, if you're not looking at it, if you don't bring it into the light, that thing is impacting you. And the way that it's impacting you is in the things that trigger you. So I know that there's a lot of discussion about the medical definition of trigger, so I don't want to overuse that or use it lightly. So let's say we get intense emotion when something happens, or we hear something, or whatever it is that's going on around us. There's an event, and suddenly we have that impact of emotion. It's not about that action most of the time. Now, there may be a law or a boundary that's crossed, and at the same time, there's something behind that you want to ensure is, being kept safe or is going with your story. So let me give you an example, because this gets really messy unless you have your own personal example. So, let's see. We don't dislike people because of the action that they're doing, but what it represents in the story that we tell ourselves. So, for example, here's a very personal example. My husband is an extreme extrovert. If anyone knows me, I'm an extreme introvert. It's been a challenge, and it's been really growing for both of us. So at first in our relationship, he had a bachelor's life before I met him. I mean, he had his daughter part-time, but any other night where he didn't have his daughter, he was out doing something. He did some karate or ninja courses, a couple nights a week. He had 2 different men's groups that he went to. He staffed all the time. Everything that came up, he was like, I'm going to go do that. I'm going to go do that. And for a while, it really, really made me mad. It made me mad that he wanted to go do all of that stuff. And I would get so angry about it. But the event would be that he would be like, oh, I'm going to go here, or I'm going to go there, or he just wouldn't be home, right? Those are the events that would bring up this emotion in me. But underneath it, it wasn't that he was going to all these things, because when I realized it, the man I really loved was the man who benefited from all of those really great things that he was doing. And he wasn't doing bad things in his life. He was doing all great things. So the man who I loved so much really was that man, because he did all those things. So I started looking at it, and what is it for me? Like, what is it that I really want? And I understood that underneath it all, I had this story that I wasn't enough, or I wasn't fun to be around, or whatever, and that's why he always wanted to be around, and he wanted to be away from me or out of the house or whatever. And the truth is, he really wanted me to go with him. He wanted to be with me. He just also wanted to do these events. So we came to negotiations in our marriage, but that's how it surfaces, right? I had no real idea that I had this piece where I really thought that I was unworthy of other people's attention unless I was doing what they wanted me to do. Until all of these signs started coming up, right? And there's probably other wounds there too. Abandonment, not worth enough. That's a lot of people's core wound, is I'm not enough, or I'm not worthy. So, but it doesn't come out, in our day. Like, our day doesn't go, are you worthy? No, it comes up with all of these other experiences that is trying to show us what that that central wound is. But we really have to dive in instead of just falling into the emotion and getting mad and going, well, it was that person's fault because they did this, or of course I got mad because this person said that. It's finding that story underneath, because there's lots of things that other people may do that don't really irritate us at all, even though we would never choose to do those things as well, you know? So what is it about this one event or experience that you're having that's bringing up all this emotion? And the reason this is really essential to find, I mean, some people are like, oh, that seems like a lot of work and introspection. But the reason this is really, really great to find is because if we can go back to that, where that core wound started, we can recognize this all the time. So there's a difference between, you know, putting it away and not wanting to look at it, and bringing it in the light and going, okay, I know I have this core wound. And what that means is that it's going to show up in all of these ways. And at those times, I can deal with it. And there's ways to manage it, and we'll talk about that in a second. But we get to discover, like, what is, you know, where are all the ways? So we get to be more curious about ourselves and in the light. So it's not being put in the shame, like, I'm not even going to look at that. Don't make me look at that. And we become defensive, right? Instead of that, we can bring it out in the light and go, okay, I'm human, so I have this wound, and how can I best address it so that it's not popping up in ways that I don't like it to pop up in my life, or at least the way that I react to it. So that's the second way, is that we're pulling it out of the shadow, right? It's also helpful to know if we have anxiety or depression or any type of mental illness, or some kind of just sensibility to certain things, that we can see how it's impacting those stories. Sometimes it's just, we tell ourselves enough negative stories that anxiety and that depression really has no choice but to come in, because that's the place that we're putting ourselves in. But if we can figure out our core wounds, we can also figure out that a lot of them are actually lies, because they're not healthy, right? It's not healthy skin, it's lies. So we have to go back to those. We also look at our core wounds to grow, and not just for ourselves, but for our relationships. If we want our relationships to get better, looking at our core wounds and having the other person be able to get their core wounds, although not required, you can still do your own work without somebody else doing theirs, and your life will still be better. So, but we can really see how those core wounds are coming up in relationships, and maybe even creating walls or blocks between us and the other person. Because if we have stories there, it's really hard to trust and connect with somebody if you have negative stories in your head about what's going on for you in that situation, and stories that may not even be true. And then most importantly, the reason we want to look at our core wounds is so that we can start telling ourselves the truth. I mean, that's really how we unravel the whole core wound, is we start looking at the truth. So a lot of us, maybe those of us who didn't grow up with one parent or another because of divorce and separation, or maybe, dad wasn't there to be with us, we have that abandonment issue, right? So we have to remember that, just because people say no to us when we invite them somewhere, just because someone's mad at us, doesn't mean that they're going to leave our relationship. And those are, stories that we can tell ourselves. I mean, 2 out of millions of stories that you could tell yourself about any core wound. We're really good as human beings to back up what we want to believe. And sadly, we often want to believe that core wound because it's been there so long. So it's actually been true, right? It's right at the core of us. So a lot of things of these core wounds have started when we were children, or when some traumatic event happened that changed how we saw things and started telling us experience that really didn't mesh with what we had believed before. So how do we recognize our core wounds? again, it goes with those times where we have an experience or an event happens, and boom, we have a really strange or unique reaction to it. Strong is what I mean, I guess, a really strong reaction to it. And we're like, whew, what's that about? And often we've already consciously, oh, well, I hate it when people do that or take my parking space or whatever. Like, there's a core wound under that person taking your parking space. What does that mean to you? You're like, what are you telling yourself? It's my parking space, and why would somebody else disrespect me, right? Well, what is that about? That's really about maybe your worth, or how you let people cross your boundaries because, I don't know. I mean, there's a million things. See your therapist. But it's really important to look at these core wounds, and you don't need a therapist to look at these core wounds, obviously. But when you're having that reaction, starting to look at it, you may not get it right away, but if you put enough of those experiences together, you start saying, wow, this goes back to that story where I'm not enough, or that I'm not good at relationships, or I'm not good at talking to people or being social, or I'm not good at being still with myself, or really looking inside and doing my work. Whatever it is that we tell ourselves that we're not good. I'm not good with anger. That's one that a lot of women tell me. Or men are just like, I'm not good with feelings. And it's really that we haven't had enough good experiences with them. It doesn't mean that we're not good at them. It's just we had an experience. It didn't turn out like we expected. And then now we have this story about that experience that we have brought over our entire life. So everything, if we don't feel worthy in relationships, chances are when we go to work, we may not feel worthy. When we take care of ourselves, we may not feel worthy enough to take care of ourselves properly. So these all come back to those essential part of the pain. What was the big stories that you tell yourself underneath all that inner critic? And that's really how we solve it, is looking at it and then telling ourselves the truth. What is the truth? Well, the truth is that, I felt over-criticized when I was young for X, Y, and Z. And now I don't feel like I'm enough, or I felt like I was stupid every time I would get something wrong. And we can look at that, we're human beings. Are we meant to do everything perfectly? No. Okay. So that's really a lie, right? The truth is that I'm a human being. I'm going to make mistakes, and that's how I learn. So instead of looking at that story as I'm not enough, I'm learning. That could be your truth. So we really need to look at that, and how is it impacting our life, and how can we start telling ourselves the other story? And then that's really where the work starts. So the core wound in, inviting shift is like that big aha, like, oh, that's the core wound. And the more that you see it, the more you'll see it popping up everywhere, and it'll be easier to deal with those circumstances that come up that normally you'd be like, whoa. Instead, you're like, there's that wound again. What's the truth? And that is really how we manage with core wounds. Now, of course, if you have extreme trauma or some serious wounded child work, then I highly suggest that you go on out and you get yourself a professional medical therapist, or whoever it is that you trust, to help you work through those things if they feel way too emotional to dive into. I can completely understand that. And I suggest that's what you do. But if you just feel like you just need to work through these stories, which I believe every woman has their own internal wisdom. Every man has their own internal wisdom. If they sit and listen to it, get support of some way, I always suggest, circles or men's groups. But those people that sit with you can reflect back to you what they're seeing over time, and you start bringing all those experiences together, and you start saying, wow, I really overreact when I feel like I'm out of control, and what's the story I'm telling myself about that when I'm not in control, I'm not safe. or, you know, whatever that is. There's lots of core wounds, and I really hope that you get to them. If you need help, I'm here. I'd love to listen and point out what I see, if that's what you want, or just hear you. Um, and that's what it's about. It's really going to help your life. When I found 2 or 3 of my core wounds, I'm now able to go, I'm getting mad at this woman in the grocery store. Why is that? Oh, right. There's that despair, that compare and despair truth I like to do, that I like to compare myself to other people just so I can make myself feel worse. And sometimes, you know, the intention is to make myself feel better, but I don't really feel better. So I don't know if you know that one either, but yeah, so really look at your core wounds. I hope that this is helpful in some way. We really want to get to that piece that's underlying. It's not about what that other person is doing or saying or what's happening to you. It's about how you're reacting to it. What is the core wound that's directing what you are saying? So if you've gotten through all this babble, I adore you, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.